Ravi's life had never been easy, but he had grown used to carrying the weight of hardships on his shoulders. At 38, he was already marked by the kind of struggles that most people only heard about in passing conversations. His small one-room rented flat barely fit the two people who called it home, him and his 7-year-old daughter, Mira. The walls were chipped, the ceiling leaked during heavy rains, and the narrow kitchen barely had enough space for a stove and a few utensils. But to Ravi, that place was more than just four walls. It was the only shelter he could afford, and it was where his little girl felt safe. Mira was the light of his life. She had his late wife's soft eyes and cheerful smile, and every time Ravi looked at her, he felt both joy and sorrow. Joy because she was his reason to wake up each morning, and sorrow because his wife was no longer there to see their daughter grow. His wife had passed away when Mira was just 2 years old, leaving Ravi broken but determined. He had promised himself that day, standing by the hospital bed with his little girl crying in his arms, that he would never let Mira feel the absence of a parent. Keeping that promise was not easy. Ravi had no fancy education, no certificates that could land him a comfortable desk job. For years, he jumped between odd jobs, working at a construction site, carrying goods at the market, sometimes selling tea at a roadside stall. Each job paid barely enough to keep a roof overhead and rice on the plate. But Ravi never allowed himself to complain. What mattered most was that Mira was fed, clothed, and had her books for school. After months of searching, Ravi finally landed a job as a cleaner in a big corporate office. At first, he had hesitated. The thought of walking into a glass-covered building filled with people wearing suits made him nervous. He worried they might laugh at him or look down on him. But when he thought of Mira, he reminded himself that dignity was not in the kind of job a man did, it was in how honestly he worked. So he signed the papers, accepted the mop and cleaning supplies, and started his new job. His first day at the office was one he would never forget. The building was massive, with shining floors, glass doors that opened automatically, and air conditioning so cold it made him shiver. He felt out of place in his faded shirt and worn-out shoes, but he reminded himself why he was there. Early in the morning, before most employees arrived, he swept the floors, wiped the windows, and emptied the dust bins. When the office filled with workers, he kept to the corners, quietly dusting shelves and cleaning restrooms. Most people didn't even notice him. Some avoided looking at him altogether, while others barely nodded. Ravi didn't mind. He wasn't there for attention. He was there to earn a living. At home, life was no easier. His mornings began at 5 a.m. when he cooked breakfast, prepared Mira's school lunch, and walked her to the bus stop before rushing to catch a bus himself. The ride to the office was long and tiring, but Ravi never missed a day. He knew every rupee of his salary mattered. In the evenings, after a full day of scrubbing floors and wiping desks, he hurried back home to help Mira with her homework. Though his own education had ended early, he did everything he could to learn alongside her so she wouldn't feel alone. Despite their struggles, there was love in their small home. Ravi would save a few coins to buy Mira her favorite toffees, or sometimes they would sit by the window during power cuts, making up stories under the candlelight. On Sundays, when he was free, he would cook her favorite meal, rice and potato curry, and they would laugh together as if the world outside didn't matter. For Ravi, those little moments were his wealth. He may not have had money in his pocket, but his daughter's smile made him feel like the richest man alive. Still, in his quiet moments, Ravi often wondered if life would ever change. He had seen men in the office well-dressed, confident, walking around as though the world bent for them. Sometimes he felt invisible in their presence. There were days when his hands ached from scrubbing, and his back hurt so badly that it was difficult to even sit up straight. Yet, he told himself that he had no right to complain. His daughter depended on him. Every drop of sweat was a step toward her future. There was one night when he returned home so exhausted that he almost collapsed at the door. Mira rushed to him, holding his arm and asking if he was okay. He forced a smile and told her he was fine, even though his body felt like it was breaking apart. She looked at him with her big innocent eyes and said softly, "Papa, one day I will grow up and take care of you. You won't have to work so hard." Ravi hugged her tightly, tears burning in his eyes. At that moment, he felt both proud and guilty, proud that his daughter understood his struggles, and guilty that she had to see them at such a young age. Yet, what Ravi did not know was that his life was about to take a turn he never expected. His world, made up of cleaning supplies, bus rides, and late nights with his daughter, would soon collide with someone from a completely different world. Someone who lived in a glass office on the top floor, the kind of person Ravi thought would never notice him. Life, however, has a way of surprising even the humblest of people. And Ravi's journey was only just beginning. Ravi slowly adjusted to the rhythm of his new workplace. Every morning he walked into the tall glass building with a bucket and mop in hand, keeping his eyes down and his steps quiet. The office always smelled of perfume and coffee, and everywhere he looked, there were people dressed in polished suits, typing on sleek laptops, and speaking in English words that sounded like music he could not fully understand. For Ravi, it was like entering a different world every day, a world that didn't belong to him. But instead of feeling bitter, he reminded himself that it was this very world that allowed him to bring home a salary to feed Mira. Though most of the employees barely noticed him, Ravi became familiar with their patterns. He knew who arrived early with files tucked under their arms, who stayed late for meetings, and who often left half-finished cups of coffee on their desks. He worked quietly, never interfering, never speaking unless someone asked him something directly. His presence was like the background of the office, always there but rarely acknowledged. Yet Ravi found a strange kind of peace in this invisibility. It allowed him to do his job without distraction, and it meant fewer chances of anyone mocking him. But there was one person in the building who stood out to everyone: the CEO, Arjun Malhotra. He was a man in his early 40s, tall and confident, with a calm but commanding presence. Whenever he entered the office, people straightened their backs, lowered their voices, and hurried to look busy. Arjun's reputation was of a brilliant businessman who had built the company with his sharp mind and relentless drive. He was respected by many, feared by some, but admired by all. His office was on the top floor, with large windows that looked out over the city. To most people, he seemed untouchable, living in a world far above theirs. To Ravi, Arjun was like a figure from another life. Sometimes, when he was cleaning the lobby or polishing the stair railings, he would see the CEO walk past surrounded by assistants. Ravi would step aside quickly, keeping his eyes low. In his mind, someone like Arjun would never notice someone like him. A man in old shoes carrying a mop had no place in the thoughts of a man who wore tailored suits and drove luxury cars. But fate has a way of weaving threads where none seem to exist. One evening, Ravi was cleaning the corridor outside the conference room long after most of the staff had left. The building was quieter than usual, and his footsteps echoed softly as he pushed the mop along the floor. Just then, the conference room door opened, and Arjun walked out holding a file in his hand. Ravi quickly stepped back, almost stumbling in surprise. He muttered an apology, lowering his eyes. To his shock, Arjun stopped and gave him a brief nod before continuing down the hall. It was a simple gesture, but for Ravi, it meant more than words. Someone like Arjun had actually acknowledged his presence, not as part of the furniture, but as a human being. After that day, Ravi noticed that Arjun seemed more observant than he had realized. Once, when Ravi was struggling to carry a bucket of water, Arjun happened to pass by. Instead of ignoring him like most others did, Arjun held the door open for him. Ravi mumbled a thank you, his voice almost shaking with nervousness. Another time, Ravi overheard Arjun asking one of the staff if the cleaning team was being paid on time. It surprised him deeply. Most people with power rarely thought of men like him, but here was a CEO who at least cared enough to ask. Still, Ravi never allowed himself to think too much about it. He believed that these small gestures were just basic kindness, not something meant for him personally. His main focus remained his daughter and his work. Each day followed the same routine: arrive early, clean the office before employees filled it, keep to himself, and leave once everything was done. But slowly, something began to change. Arjun started noticing Ravi more often. He saw how diligently the man worked, never once complaining, never once cutting corners. He observed how Ravi carried himself with quiet dignity despite his worn clothes and tired eyes. There was something about him that stood apart from others: a strength built from hardship, a patience that came only from sacrifice. One afternoon, Arjun had to stay late in the office. Most of the employees had left, and the building grew silent. Ravi entered the floor with his mop, surprised to find the CEO still there. He tried to move quickly, hoping not to disturb him, but Arjun looked up from his papers and asked gently, "You work this late every day?" Ravi froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. No one ever asked him such things. He nodded and said softly, "Yes, sir. This is my duty." Arjun studied him for a moment, then gave a small smile before returning to his work. For Ravi, that short conversation echoed in his mind the whole night. It wasn't much, just a simple question, but it made him realize that perhaps the CEO didn't see him as invisible after all. At home, Mira sometimes asked her father about his workplace. She imagined it as a palace of glass and lights, and she often asked him if he ever met the big boss. Ravi would chuckle and shake his head, telling her, "He has no reason to know me, beta. I just do my work quietly." But inside, a small part of him couldn't forget the rare moments of kindness Arjun had shown. As the weeks passed, the gap between their worlds still seemed wide, but the threads of connection slowly grew stronger. Ravi didn't know it yet, but destiny had already begun writing a story where two very different lives would meet, not as CEO and cleaner, not as rich and poor, but as two men whose hearts would learn to see beyond the walls of status and struggle. Ravi's days moved forward in their usual rhythm. He had grown used to the long hours of work and the silence that came with his position. But one evening, something happened that changed the ordinary routine of his life forever. It was a rainy day, the kind of day when the streets outside filled with water and buses ran late. Ravi had no choice but to bring Mira with him to the office because she had developed a mild fever and there was nobody else to watch her at home. He couldn't leave her alone in their small flat, not when she was unwell. So he held her little hand, wrapped her in his old scarf, and carried her along to the tall glass building where he worked. Mira was shy at first, clinging to her father's arm as they entered. She had never been inside such a huge office before, and her wide eyes followed the bright lights and shiny floors with awe. Ravi settled her in a quiet corner of the lobby with a notebook and pencil, asking her to sit still while he worked. He promised her he wouldn't be far away. Though she nodded bravely, he still felt a pang of guilt in his heart. He worried what the management would say if they found a child in the building. But for Ravi, it was a choice between risking a scolding or leaving his daughter alone at home in sickness. He chose what his heart told him was right. As the evening stretched on, the building grew quieter. Most employees had already left, and Ravi went about his cleaning tasks quickly, keeping an eye on Mira from a distance. But fate has its own plans. As Ravi was mopping the corridor near the main office, the CEO, Arjun Malhotra, stepped out of his cabin. Ravi froze instantly, his heart racing. He prayed silently that the man would not notice the little girl sitting with her notebook. But Arjun's eyes, sharp as always, did not miss anything. He glanced at the child, then back at Ravi. For a moment, Ravi was terrified. He expected a harsh question or maybe even an order to leave. Instead, to his complete shock, Arjun walked toward the corner where Mira sat. Ravi quickly dropped his mop and hurried forward, stammering an apology. Sir, I am sorry, she is my daughter. She was not well, so I had no choice but to bring her here. Please forgive me. It won't happen again. His words tumbled out nervously, his voice heavy with fear. But Arjun did not scold him. Instead, he bent down slightly so he was at Mira's eye level and asked softly, "What's your name?" Mira looked at her father, unsure whether to reply. Ravi nodded gently, and she whispered, "Mira." Arjun gave her a small smile. "That's a beautiful name. What are you drawing there?" She showed him the notebook shyly. It was a rough sketch of a house with a small garden, drawn with a child's innocent imagination. Arjun studied it for a moment before saying, "You're very talented. You should keep drawing." Ravi stood in stunned silence. He had never expected the CEO, the man everyone admired and feared, to speak so kindly to his daughter. Arjun looked up at him and said calmly, "It's all right. She can stay here if you need her to. Children shouldn't be left alone." Those simple words hit Ravi deeply. He had prepared himself for anger or dismissal, but instead, he found compassion. That night, as he walked home with Mira sleeping lightly against his shoulder, his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He kept replaying the moment in his mind, Arjun speaking gently to his daughter, not as a powerful CEO, but as a man with kindness in his eyes. From that day onward, a subtle change began. Whenever Arjun passed Ravi in the office, his glance lingered a little longer. Sometimes he asked small questions, like, "How is your daughter feeling now, or did she go back to school?" These were ordinary questions to anyone else, but to Ravi, they were extraordinary. No one in his life, apart from his daughter, had ever shown such genuine concern. Slowly, conversations grew. Once, Arjun found Ravi in the pantry area during a late shift. Ravi was eating a simple meal he had carried from home, a few chapatis wrapped in cloth. Embarrassed, he quickly tried to hide it, but Arjun stopped him. "Don't hide it. You've worked hard all day. You deserve to eat in peace." Ravi looked at him in surprise, unsure how to respond. That moment stayed with him for a long time, warming his heart during lonely nights. What surprised Ravi even more was that Arjun seemed to admire him. While others overlooked the cleaner, Arjun noticed his dedication. He saw the way Ravi worked without shortcuts, how he never left a corner untidy, how he carried himself with quiet strength even when his clothes were worn and his shoes old. One evening, Arjun even said, almost thoughtfully, "You have a lot of patience. Most people in your place would have given up, but you haven't." Ravi had no words. He only bowed his head and whispered, "It's for my daughter, sir." That honesty touched Arjun in a way he could not explain. He had met countless people in his life, businessmen, investors, partners, but very few who spoke with such sincerity. Ravi's love for his daughter reminded him of values that money could never buy. At home, Mira noticed the change too. She asked her father about the kind man in the big office who had spoken to her. Ravi tried to brush it off, saying, "He's just my boss, beta. Don't think much about it." But in truth, he thought about it often. There was something about Arjun that unsettled him, not in a bad way, but in a way that made his heart restless. He couldn't understand why someone so far above him would even bother to notice him. Yet the connection kept growing. There were days when Arjun would stop by during late hours and talk to Ravi for a few minutes. The topics were simple life, work, sometimes even small stories about childhood. Ravi was surprised that a man who ran such a big company could also speak so normally, with warmth and humor. For the first time in years, Ravi felt seen, not as a worker in the background, but as a person with a story. What Ravi did not realize was that in those quiet conversations, Arjun too was finding something rare. Surrounded by people who flattered him or feared him, Arjun saw in Ravi an honesty that was refreshing. He admired his resilience, his humility, and above all, his devotion as a father. Slowly, an unspoken bond began to grow, something fragile but undeniable. Ravi never dared to imagine what it could mean. He told himself again and again that their worlds were too different, that he should not allow his heart to wander into dreams. Yet at night, when he sat by the window watching Mira sleep, his mind often returned to those moments: Arjun smiling at his daughter, Arjun speaking gently to him, Arjun noticing him when no one else did. For a man who had lived in shadows for so long, even the smallest light felt overwhelming. And so, what began as a chance encounter with a sick child in the office slowly turned into something much deeper. Ravi's life was changing, though he still did not fully understand how. All he knew was that the CEO he once thought untouchable had started to walk into his world in ways he never expected, and with each passing day, the distance between them grew a little smaller. Life has a strange way of testing people when they least expect it. For Ravi, just when he thought things were finally becoming a little easier, new challenges appeared. His growing connection with Arjun did not go unnoticed. The office was full of eyes, and in a place where gossip traveled faster than truth, whispers began to spread. At first, it was small things: people wondering why the CEO sometimes spoke to the cleaner, why he asked about his daughter, why he smiled at him when others barely acknowledged his presence. Soon the whispers turned into louder talk. Some laughed behind Ravi's back, saying he was trying to get special attention. Others accused him of pretending to be humble just to gain favor. Ravi, who had always kept to himself, suddenly found himself the center of unwanted attention. It hurt him deeply. He was a man of dignity, and never in his life had he tried to use anyone for benefit. All he wanted was to do his job honestly, feed his daughter, and return home in peace. But now, every time he entered the office with his mop and bucket, he could feel eyes following him. Some employees looked at him with pity, others with judgment. He wanted to explain that he had never asked for Arjun's kindness, that it had simply happened naturally, but he had no voice in that world. To them, he was just the cleaner. One afternoon, while he was polishing the lobby floor, he overheard two staff members talking. They didn't know he was close enough to hear. "It's strange, isn't it? The boss talking so much with the janitor. What could he possibly see in him?" The other laughed. "Maybe he feels sorry for him. Or maybe the man is smarter than he looks and knows how to catch the boss's sympathy." Their words pierced Ravi like knives. He lowered his head and continued his work, but inside, his heart was heavy. He feared that this gossip might not only hurt his reputation but also cost him the job that kept his daughter alive. Meanwhile, Arjun too was facing pressure from his own circle. His close associates noticed his unusual attention toward Ravi. In business meetings, some hinted lightly about it, asking whether he was too involved with the staff. At first, Arjun ignored them, but as the remarks grew sharper, he realized people were watching closely. Even his family, who belonged to a wealthy circle, began questioning him. His mother once asked him directly, "Why do you keep lowering yourself by speaking to that man? There are better people for you to be around." Arjun listened quietly but did not answer. He had never been a man who let others dictate his choices, but this time, he felt the weight of society's expectations pressing harder. Despite all this, Arjun did not step back from Ravi. In fact, his respect for him only grew. He admired how Ravi carried himself with grace even when people whispered about him. He saw how Ravi ignored the gossip and kept working hard, never cutting corners, never losing his patience. One evening, Arjun called him into his office. Ravi stood nervously by the door, afraid he had done something wrong. But instead, Arjun said calmly, "I know people are talking. I want you to remember one thing: it doesn't matter what they say. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I've seen your honesty, and that's enough." Ravi's throat tightened with emotion. No one had ever defended him like that. With folded hands, he whispered, "Thank you, sir." But please, I don't want to cause you trouble. I can stay away if needed. Arjun shook his head firmly. You don't need to hide. You've done nothing wrong. Those words filled Ravi's heart with both relief and fear. Relief because he was not alone, fear because he knew that the more their bond grew, the harder the world around them would try to break it. Around this time, Arjun also began helping Ravi in ways that surprised him. He quietly arranged for Mira's school admission into a better institution. When Ravi discovered this, he was overwhelmed. He went to Arjun's office, almost in tears, saying, "Sir, I cannot accept this. I have no way to repay you." But Arjun simply replied, "You don't need to repay me. Your daughter deserves a future, and I have the means to help. That's all." Ravi walked out of that room with his heart beating fast, unsure of how to deal with such kindness. He had spent years being invisible, and now someone was opening doors he never dreamed possible. But the road was far from smooth. One evening, as Ravi was leaving work, a group of employees stopped him. One of them smirked and said, "So, how does it feel to be the CEO's favorite? Must be nice to have such connections." Ravi clenched his fists but kept quiet. He knew if he reacted, it would only make things worse. At home, he sat silently while Mira chatted about her school day. He didn't want her to know the burden he carried, so he forced a smile, hiding his worries behind gentle words. Arjun, too, was not untouched by the pressure. Business partners began hinting that his decisions might be clouded by personal distractions. Some even suggested he keep professional distance from staff. But Arjun was not a man to bow down easily. Instead, he grew more determined. He began spending more time with Ravi, sometimes asking him to sit for tea in his office, sometimes walking alongside him in the corridor, ignoring the looks of others. The more people tried to create a wall between them, the more Arjun showed openly that he valued Ravi. For Ravi, this was both a blessing and a burden. He could feel the warmth of Arjun's respect, and deep inside, his heart began to respond in ways he had never allowed before. But he also feared what such closeness could bring. He often lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, asking himself questions he could not answer. Was it wrong to let this bond grow? Was he dreaming too much? Could someone like Arjun truly care for someone like him? And if he did, would the world ever let it be? The struggle was not only with others but also within himself. Ravi had built his life around sacrifices, always putting Mira first, always choosing survival over dreams. But now, with Arjun's presence, new emotions stirred inside him, emotions of being valued, of being seen, of being cared for. It was frightening and beautiful at the same time. In the middle of all this, Mira noticed the change too. She would sometimes ask, "Papa, why do you smile when you talk about the boss?" Ravi would laugh it off, telling her she was imagining things. But children see more than adults realize. She sensed that her father, who had carried so much sadness, now carried a spark of hope. And so, the days passed with trials and judgments surrounding them. Ravi faced gossip, Arjun faced pressure, but neither let go of the bond that was forming. It was not a loud or dramatic bond, but a quiet, steady one built on respect, on kindness, and on the simple yet powerful truth that two human hearts had begun to understand each other despite the walls of society. What neither of them knew was that this bond, though tested by many, was only going to grow stronger. Life was preparing them for a turning point that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves, about the world, and about the courage it takes to accept love when it comes from the most unexpected place. Time has a way of revealing truths that cannot remain hidden. For weeks, Ravi and Arjun had walked carefully around their growing closeness, as though afraid to name what their hearts already knew. But sometimes silence speaks louder than words, and the way Arjun's eyes softened when he looked at Ravi, the way Ravi's voice steadied when he spoke to Arjun, these were signs that no gossip or judgment could erase. Ravi often told himself not to think too much. He reminded himself every night that Arjun belonged to a world far above his own. Yet every time Arjun spoke to him with respect, every time he asked about Mira as if she were his own child, Ravi's defenses weakened. He had never imagined that someone of such status could treat him not as a servant, not as a poor worker, but as an equal. It was frightening, because hope was dangerous. He had lived his whole life trying not to expect more than what fate gave him. But now, hope crept in like sunlight through cracks in the wall. One evening, after most of the staff had left, Arjun asked Ravi to sit with him in his office. Ravi hesitated at the door, wiping his hands nervously on his faded trousers, but Arjun's calm smile eased him. They sat across from each other, a CEO in a sharp suit and a cleaner in worn-out clothes, yet the silence between them felt natural, almost comforting. Arjun finally spoke, his voice softer than usual. "Ravi, I want to tell you something. I know people are talking. I know you've been hurt by their words. But I want you to hear this from me. I don't care what they say. I respect you more than many people I've met in my life. You remind me what honesty and strength really look like." Ravi felt his chest tighten. He lowered his eyes, unable to meet the steady gaze across the table. "Sir, I am just an ordinary man. I clean your office, I mop your floors. I don't deserve such words from someone like you." Arjun leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "You are wrong. You are extraordinary. You take care of your daughter with more devotion than I have seen in anyone. You work harder than men who earn 10 times your salary. And you carry yourself with dignity, even when the world looks down on you. That is not ordinary, Ravi. That is rare." Tears pricked Ravi's eyes. He had always hidden his emotions, showing strength for Mira's sake. But in that moment, sitting in front of a man who truly saw him, his heart felt both heavy and light. He whispered, "You don't know how much these words mean to me." From that day, their bond could no longer be denied, not even to themselves. It was no longer just respect or kindness, it had grown into affection, quiet but undeniable. They never spoke of it openly, but their eyes did, their silences did. Ravi began to notice how Arjun would pause to ask if he had eaten, how he would make time to greet Mira warmly whenever she visited. Mira, in her innocent way, grew fond of Arjun too. She often told her father, "Papa, he is like family. I like him." Those words scared Ravi, but they also filled him with warmth he had never known. The world outside, however, was not so kind. Gossip only grew louder. People whispered in corners, made remarks behind their backs, and questioned Arjun's choices. Some even suggested that Ravi was manipulating the CEO for a better life. Every word cut into Ravi like a blade. Many nights, he lay awake wondering if he should quit the job to end the talk once and for all. He feared that Mira might one day hear the cruel things people said, and he could not bear the thought of her innocent heart being hurt. When Ravi finally gathered the courage to speak to Arjun about resigning, Arjun refused firmly. "If you leave, it means they win. And I will not let lies decide our lives. Do you trust me?" Ravi looked into his eyes and nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." Arjun smiled. "Then stay. Walk with me through this. We don't need the world's approval to know what is right." That was the turning point. For the first time in his life, Ravi realized that love was not about wealth or status, it was about two hearts finding courage in each other. He had spent years believing that his life was meant only for survival, but Arjun made him believe in something more. He made him believe that even a poor single father, worn down by struggle, could be loved for who he was. The journey was not easy. There were days when Ravi's fear almost overpowered his hope. But each time, Arjun stood by him, steady as a rock. Slowly, people began to see that what tied them together was not convenience, but truth. It wasn't long before Arjun made a bold decision. In a company event, surrounded by staff and business partners, he introduced Ravi not as a worker, but as someone who mattered deeply to him. The shock was visible, the whispers immediate, but Arjun's voice was steady. Respect is not defined by money or title. It is defined by character. And I stand by my choice without shame. For Ravi, standing there beside him, the moment felt unreal. His heart pounded, his palms sweated, but when he looked at Arjun, he saw no doubt, only certainty. That gave him the strength to hold his head high, even as eyes stared at him from every corner. At home, Mira was the happiest of all. She clapped her hands in excitement when she realized that the kind man she admired would be a part of their lives. She hugged Arjun openly, saying, "Now I have two fathers who care for me." Ravi's eyes filled with tears at her innocence, but his heart swelled with gratitude. From then on, life began to change. There were still challenges society never stops judging, but Ravi no longer feared them. He had walked through storms his whole life, and now he had someone to share the umbrella with. Arjun, with his wealth and power, and Ravi, with his honesty and resilience, built something that neither of them could have achieved alone. They created a home where love was stronger than gossip, where Mira could grow surrounded not by riches of money, but by riches of affection and respect. Ravi often sat by the window at night, watching his daughter sleep peacefully, and thought about how far they had come. He remembered the nights of hunger, the days of ridicule, the endless struggles. And now he looked at the man who had entered their lives unexpectedly, and he felt something he had not felt in years. Peace. He realized that true wealth was not in the size of one's home or the weight of one's wallet. It was in the hearts that beat for each other. He thought back to the promise he had made years ago by his wife's hospital bed that he would raise Mira with love and never let her feel alone. Today, he knew he had kept that promise, but life had given him more than he had asked for. It had given him a partner who saw him not as poor or broken, but as worthy. It had given Mira someone who cherished her as his own. Their story was not perfect, but it was real. It was a story of struggle, of courage, and of love that dared to rise above walls of class and judgment. Ravi, the poor single dad who once carried a mop into a glass building, never imagined that the man who owned the building would one day carry him into a life of respect and love. But sometimes, life writes its own scripts, and love finds its way where no one expects it. And so, with Mira's laughter filling their home and Arjun's steady presence by his side, Ravi finally allowed himself to breathe. He no longer lived only to survive. He lived to love, to hope, and to believe that even the humblest heart could be chosen first.